The following podcast contains mature language and discussions that are not suitable for younger audiences. The opinions voiced in this podcast are our own. We are not experts on the topic we present, but have conducted our own research. Listener discretion is advised. Canada's nickname has been the Great White North for as long as I can remember. The country is no stranger to snowstorms and ice. Some of these storms can cause schools and workplaces to shut down, or even vehicles to slip off roads and highways. But some storms are worse than others. Much worse. Heading back in time to January of 1977, there was one such storm that hit southern Ontario and western New York so hard that these cities were placed into a state of emergency and shut down due to its severity. Thousands of people were stranded, and some would even lose their lives. How did this storm happen? Why was it so devastating? And is it going to happen again? Welcome to the Strange and Undecided podcast. Welcome back, everyone. We are starting off season 2 strong here. I'm your host, Jarrett, joined by my co-host,
Patrick, and
co-host,
Brando.
Welcome for your first time.
Hey, Brando. How you doing?
Oh, I'm really excited, guys. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem.
This is our new podcast studio and our new co-host.
So I hope everybody had a good holiday. I know we did. There was a lot going on during that time. I actually moved. I'm out of my apartment and into a house now. So I'm very happy about that and actually have a proper studio that I can actually record stuff from. So today's topic is going to be on the blizzard of 1977. And that affected Southern Ontario, as I said in the intro. And Pat actually chose this episode for us, which normally I choose them. But thank you for your contribution, Pat.
It's the first time I've contributed anything.
We appreciate it.
No pressure.
Kicking off season 2, strong.
All right, so let's get into it. The morning of January 28th, 1977 began like any other wintry day. People got up and prepared to go to work, and kids got ready for school. Nothing stood out about this day until meteorologists saw what was coming. By then, it was too late. A large cold front was traveling over Michigan and Ohio, heading straight towards southern Ontario and western New York, across Lake Erie. From a distance, people could see a whitish gray wall heading in their direction. Later that morning at 11 a.m., the wall hit the cities. Heavy snowfall started coming down, reducing visibility, and it didn't stop. By the afternoon, the snow had piled up so much that people in their homes recounted looking out their windows at their cars and seeing the snow all the way up to their bumpers. Accompanying this, roads slowly began to become impassable as the snow continued to stack up and pack down. Within the first 4 hours of the storm, the temperature had dropped from minus 3 degrees Celsius to minus 18 degrees Celsius. The wind had also picked up during this time and caused dangerous blowing snow, which further reduced visibility to virtually zero, and wind gusts ranged from 74 to 111 kilometers an hour. Keep in mind that weak tornadoes produce winds ranging from 105 to 137 kilometers per hour, according to the Fujita scale. The wind chill was so severe that it felt as cold as minus 60 degrees Celsius in the most affected places. This deadly concoction of weather consisting of high winds, blowing snow, and a sudden drop in temperature caused many cars to break down on the roads, and people had to abandon them right then and there. The snow was being blown by the wind so aggressively that snowdrifts formed in some areas measuring over 30 feet tall. The high winds had also compacted the snow so much it gave it a cement-like quality, making it almost impossible to dig through and clear.
As soon as you started talking about this, like I've started rewatching Game of Thrones,
Oh boy.
and all that's been screaming through my head is winter is coming.
I was just
Like,
gonna
it's-
say, this sounds like the start to an epic movie or something.
Many people were forced to make shelter at the closest buildings or homes, which proved to be difficult just to get into. Thousands of people ended up being stranded and had to seek shelter wherever they could find it. Parents who were at home or at work were terrified as children in schools were stranded and would have to stay until the storm passed. There was simply no safe way to get them out of the schools. In the Niagara region alone, approximately 2,000 kids were stranded inside various schools. Some schools closed down before lunchtime, however. They didn't close soon enough, though. Teachers who stayed late to ensure students were picked up ended up getting stuck in snowdrifts not far from the school and were subsequently stranded overnight. In some other areas, school buses had also broken down or got stuck in the snow, and the bus driver had to take the kids to safety in any of the nearby buildings. In the Niagara region, some places reported over 4 feet of snow on the roads, making it impossible to travel through. Many people at home were stuck as the snow had covered their doors and windows, making it almost impossible to get out. The lack of visibility due to the high winds and blowing snow proved to be a problem for people simply trying to walk through the storm. In some places, people formed human chains leading to shelters to assist people in not getting lost. Those who didn't want to face the storm stayed in their cars, hoping the blizzard would blow over eventually. Unfortunately, the storm raged on. Traffic came to a standstill and cars slowly began to get buried by the snow, forcing the occupants to flee or to wait it out.
That's crazy, Jared. Like the part that really got me was like being stuck in schools.
Yeah.
I work at a school. I couldn't imagine that. I understand now why the schools will close down like the day before now, because if it's, I don't know, going to be a little chilly the next day, I couldn't imagine this.
Yeah, it was something that nobody was prepared for. The blizzard continued into the night, leaving people stranded in their cars, various buildings, and in the homes of people who were nice enough to take them in. Some homes harbored over 30 people seeking refuge from the storm. Not everyone was nice, though. In the coming days, looters would cause a big problem as they were breaking into the abandoned cars and stealing radios and whatever they could get their hands on. But this wasn't the worst of the problems. Many people believed it would all be over by the next day and they could go back to their regular lives. But it wasn't over yet. The storm had just begun. Since there was no conventional mode of transportation like cars or buses, supplies and food were not able to be transported to people in desperate need of it. To combat this, snowmobiles were used as the primary delivery method over the next few days for getting supplies to people stranded or just getting them from one place to another. The Niagara Regional Police Service enlisted the help of 60 snowmobiles and 15 four-wheel drive vehicles to be used by the police force to answer calls and to help people in need. The snowmobiles were also used to transport workers to their jobs, such as doctors and nurses, as well as Ontario Hydro workers. Communication was difficult as many phone lines were down, so police resorted to the use of citizen band or CB radio. The snow was even so bad in places that snowmobiles were traveling over top of cars and they weren't even aware of it. Some houses were only able to be seen and located by their chimneys that were sticking out the top of the snow. The snow had even piled up so high in places that it reached the top of hydro poles, and snowmobiles had to deal with getting the power lines caught when they were traversing the snow. Nevertheless, it was the only reliable mode of transportation at the moment.
At what point during the storm do you think it went from, oh, that's cool, like, that's a ton of snow, like, whoa, to, oh shit, like, this is getting scary?
I think it happened pretty quickly because, as we'll get into later, there was already in the month before a ton of snow that already came down. So they were already dealing with a ton of snow from before. So this was just another day initially, and it actually started out a little bit warmer than the other days were. So it started out as a completely normal day and probably a bit of a relief to some people. And then they saw this massive wall coming off of Lake Erie towards them. And that's the moment when they were like, uh-oh, like something bad's going to happen.
As a Canadian adult, any bit of snow is annoying because you got to go to work and you got to do your daily things and it's just a nuisance. But if you're a kid, it's like, this is awesome. Get to go sledding.
Schools were out, but like during this time, like you didn't have to go to class. Like I remember when we were in grade school and high school, it was like the best day ever when you got a snow day.
Oh yeah, it's like such a novelty. It's like such a different day from your norm.
I'm having such a hard time imagining snow at the top of hydro poles.
Right.
Like I can't even begin to fathom that.
So I do want to make the clarification that this wasn't just snow coming from like the clouds and falling down and it wasn't 10 feet. This is a lot of blowing snow that's creating drifts that are causing it to look like there's way more snow than there actually is. Regardless of that, it is still equally as devastating and dangerous.
Apparently, there's a phenomenon called lake effect snow.
Yes.
So it's like when we live near the Great Lakes in Ontario here. So when the wind blows over the lakes, it causes that water to evaporate, which causes extra bits of snow drifts. Does that sound correct?
Yeah. So as we'll get into later when I do talk about lake effect snow, it's the cold front hits the warm air of the lake. And when it does that, it picks up that air, brings it up into the atmosphere and turns that into snow and it dumps it inland. But that actually wasn't the case here, that makes it even more interesting. So we'll get into that a little bit later.
It's super weird though, because it doesn't dump it right beside the lake. It like goes way inland where you don't expect it.
The snowmobiles could only do so much when thousands of people were stranded. More help was needed, and the city officials realized it. On January 29th, the region of Niagara was placed into a state of emergency. Mayors requested military assistance that same day as they realized just how bad things were. Reports of over 15,000 military personnel were deployed to assist between Canada and the United States. The military's initial priorities were to preserve life and clear main roadways and highways in and out of communities to facilitate a route for vehicles and for people to move through. It is important to note that in many places there was a no travel effect in order, and some people were even being fined for unnecessary trips. The military also assisted people in whatever way they could, such as finding stranded motorists in the snow and getting them to safety, or in the transportation of supplies and food. Fortunately, there was a break in the storm on the morning of January 30th. This allowed many people that were stranded, as well as students trapped in schools, to be reunited with their families. Many of these kids hadn't seen their families in 2 days. Due to workers being stuck and unable to transport various items and make deliveries, some of their goods would end up going to waste. For example, there were farmers in Wainfleet, Ontario that had to dump milk shipments since it would simply go bad, and even more concerning was they were not able to adequately feed their animals, which ran the risk of them dying. Once again, people had to rely on the good faith of members in the community who were willing to lend their snowmobiles to bring them supplies and food. As mentioned before, the snow was difficult to break up due to the high winds compacting it so much that it even made conventional snowplows useless. Some roads were so bad that the snow had to be removed by tractors with front-end loaders or even large bulldozers. Smaller bulldozers proved to be more successful, but even then, it would take 2 to 3 days just to clear a section of road only 270 meters long.
I do like the sense of community that I'm feeling during this tragic event.
But yeah, this was a good example of people coming together and just helping your fellow human in need.
Yeah, it kind of takes like a big misfortune to do that sometimes, which is unfortunate, but it does bring out the best in people, hopefully.
To give an idea of the scope of the storm and the areas which it affected in Ontario, the entire Niagara Peninsula was hit hard. However, some areas that were hit the worst were the southern parts of the peninsula across the Niagara River, extending westward along the northern edge of Lake Erie. Some of these cities included Fort Erie, Port Colborne, Wainfleet, Long Beach, and Lowbanks. It would eventually be determined that cities and towns closest to Lake Erie experienced the worst effects of the blizzard. So basically, lakeshore towns. The closer you were to the lake, the more devastating it was. The storm wasn't limited to this area, however. Across the lake in New York, residents of Buffalo and the surrounding areas were being hit just as hard, if not worse. Moving back to Ontario, the storm stretched as far away as London, Kitchener, and even Toronto. These places experienced high winds and blowing snow during the initial day of the storm, and they even had wind gusts ranging from 50 to 80 kilometers per hour. It is important to note here that the places where the blizzard affected had already experienced higher than normal snowfall for that season. For example, it was reported that Port Colborne had received 136.4 centimeters of snow, and Fort Erie had received 103.5 centimeters of snow since Christmas. During the 2 days before the blizzard hit, 45.8 centimeters of snow had arrived in Fort Erie, and 8.9 centimeters fell on Port Colborne. By 6 p.m. on January 29th, there were still over 800 students trapped in the schools. 600 of those students were in the Wainfleet and Port Colborne area. On Sunday, there was a glimmer of hope. As I stated before, the winds had decided to stop blowing so aggressively, giving people a chance to make a move. However, by mid-afternoon, the winds increased again and another 11.7 centimeters of snow fell.
It's almost like you're in the eye of the storm, of like a tornado analogy.
Yeah.
Sounds more like the day after tomorrow to me.
Yeah, that's what... The whole time I was reading this, that's exactly what I pictured in my mind was that movie.
It's just never ending. Like you get a little glimmer of hope and then it's like, no, we're getting dumped on more.
How did the dogs take dumps?
Well, it's like, would you even let your dog out? My one dog would not go out. My other one would gladly go out if I was able to shovel a little path. But like,
I think that's it, is if you had to shovel a little pathway or else your dog's going in the house.
Yeah.
On Monday, January 31st, more snow, 8.1 centimeters, fell on Port Colborne, and the windy conditions caused more blowing snow and higher snow drifts. At this point, it really seemed like the blizzard was only getting worse and was never going to stop. Fortunately, on Tuesday, February 1st, after 4 days, the storm began to move east and released its icy grip on southern Ontario and western New York. The damage the storm had caused by that point in time was shocking. Thousands of cars were trapped under the snow, leaving thousands of people stranded in the nearby buildings, fighting just to survive. In the town of Wainfleet, one resident recounted that during the initial day of the storm, the wind was so fierce that it broke through the window of the house that was facing the lake, and the snow began to pile up inside. Not far away in Lowbanks, a resident told a similar story where the winds had smashed in windows and collapsed doors in a number of houses in the area. Unfortunately, the storm was so aggressive that some people didn't make it out alive. In Ontario, it was reported that 2 people from the Niagara region lost their lives due to overexertion from shoveling in the storm. Across Lake Erie, the death toll was much worse. A total of 29 deaths occurred across New York. Many of these people had passed away in their vehicles from suffocation from their cars being entirely covered or simply freezing to death. Others had died from accidents during the storm, and some even had heart attacks.
What a grisly scene. Imagine that's snow melting or uncovering all those vehicles and just finding bodies inside.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. And that I didn't even mention, but the amount of people who had frostbite, hypothermia, the damage was devastating, to say the least. As stated before, the storm let up after Tuesday, February 1st, but it would take weeks to clean up all the snow, dig cars out, and let people get back to their normal lives. It was painfully slow.
I wonder how long it took for all the snow to melt.
So March had significantly warmer temperatures, but it wasn't too warm to the point where it caused flooding. However, there were some areas that were so bad and piled up with so much snow that it didn't melt until May. But that was the biggest thing, is people were worried about if all this snow melts at once, are we going to have flooding issues? But fortunately, Mother Nature was nice enough to grace the people with no flooding issues.
It's the least she could do.
Aid came from the Salvation Army and other organizations to help feed people and provide them with supplies. Snow removal machines were transported from other areas of Ontario to help clear the snow. Many workplaces and schools remained closed the remainder of the week while the cleanup occurred. The overall estimated cost for damages and cleanup was $300 million between Southern Ontario and New York. Today, that translates to almost $1.4 billion. This storm made a significant mark on the people who experienced it and beyond. It would be remembered through the years and would even make its way into pop culture in the form of music. Jimmy Buffett referenced the storm in a song called Son of a Sailor. The band Not a Surf made a song in 2002 called Blizzard of 77. Finally, and Pat's been waiting for this, Canadian band Alexis on Fire released a song on their third studio album in 2006 called Crisis.
So, Crisis is the reason I chose this topic. It's one of my favorite bands, one of my favorite albums, and the song is just so menacing. If you pull up the album cover, the album is also titled Crisis. So here's a photo of somebody with frostbitten hands from that storm. That's on the album cover. What do you think of that, Brando?
Just going through like this entire episode, it's like you say that people got these things, and then to actually like see a photo of it, it really just, wow.
Yeah, and I had no idea of this event. We're born in the 90s. So yeah, listening to the lyrics of this song just brings it into perspective how devastating this thing was. I would like to read a couple of the lines from the song. If you've never listened to Alexis on Fire, I highly suggest you read along with the lyrics as George viciously screams them out, so it's hard to understand them. The temperature's through the floor. Your fingers are turning black. There's a crisis knocking at your door. 1977, 1977. You better try to make it home. The snow is getting too deep to drive. Your car might be a coffin. 1977, 1977.
So the looming question some of you may have is, how did something like this happen? As I touched on previously, there were certain weather conditions that enhanced the blizzard and made it worse, such as the snowfall. This started a couple months before the storm in November of 1976. For the majority of November, December, and January, the temperature outside was well below the average for that time of the year. More importantly, with these lower temperatures, this caused Lake Erie to almost entirely freeze over by the end of December, which is a month before it usually does freeze over. There was also no thaw during this time, which would normally allow some snow relief. So why is this important? When Lake Erie freezes, lake effect snow does not occur because cold fronts traveling over the lake cannot pick up moisture from the lake's surface, convert the moisture to snow, and then dump it when the winds reach shore. Instead, snow was continually piling up on Lake Erie, and it ended up being 3 to 4 feet deep before January 28th. These unnaturally cold conditions in January, lacking the thawing and refreezing, caused the snow on the frozen lake to remain light and powdery and wasn't able to pack down. The combination of the snow on top of the ice of Lake Erie, as well as the pre-existing snow on the ground before the blizzard hit, provided ample material for the high winds to blow the snow and create huge drifts. Lake Ontario rarely freezes over, which meant northern New York had to deal with a large amount of snow coming down. So that's where the lake effect snow was coming from, was from Lake Ontario. Due to abnormal atmospheric conditions, the polar vortex, which is an area of cold air that hovers around the North and South poles, had moved into southern Canada, which was much further south than its normal location. On the morning of January 28th, the cold polar air was coming in from the west and southwest. Once again, this was not normal. In these conditions, cold air was being funneled straight up the length of Lake Erie, producing the highest winds, which would hit southern Ontario and western New York. This explained the sudden onset of the blizzard as the winds picked up the 3 to 4 feet of snow that was resting on the surface of Lake Erie and slammed it into the cities and anything in its path. The winds also didn't change directions over the duration of the storm, so the areas that were hit initially continued to get hit without any change. This was one of the main reasons the blizzard was so bad. At this point, I'm asking myself, and I'm sure you are too, if something like this could ever happen again. And the short answer is yes. As I stated previously, there has to be various weather conditions that exist before something like this happens. So to summarize, Lake Erie must freeze over completely, and it must freeze over earlier than it normally does. The snow had piled up deep enough, which gave the perfect ammunition for the storm to use against the cities in its path. The temperature must also be cold as well, not allowing for anything to thaw. Thawing would have allowed the depth of the snow to decrease and would have packed it down, making it harder or impossible for the wind to pick it up and dump it on the cities. Finally, the polar vortex needs to travel farther south than it normally does, and it has to bring strong winds across Lake Erie that do not shift direction. Without this, there's no blizzard.
I like the way you use the word ammunition against the cities. Like it's out to get us.
Oh, it was.
But, in reality, it's just Mother Nature doing what she does best, right?
While it may seem like the perfect storm, and that this is highly unlikely to happen, there is still a chance that everything could come together once again. It did before, but will we be prepared this time, or will we be caught off guard? I'll let you decide.
And to end this episode off, I feel like it's fitting that I read you the chorus of Crisis. The season's growing cold. I fear that this could be the end. And there's no sign of hope. We've got a crisis on our hands.
All right, so that's the episode, and that's the case of the blizzard of 77.
Like, I still can't believe, like, something like that happened. Like, of course, like, yeah, we were born in the 90s. I feel like when we were kids, like, yeah, it'd get pretty cold. We would maybe have, like, one bad snow day here or there. And, like, one of these things would happen at a time. But to have all those things happen at the same time, like, I can't even imagine.
It's the perfect storm. It's exactly what it is. And they've made movies of stuff like that. Like, I think the closest we ever came to experiencing a really bad snowstorm was when we were in grade 11.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
And it was dubbed Snowmageddon,
Yep.
at least by our friends. But schools shut down for, I think it was 3 days, which was, for us, amazing.
Wasn't it right near exams? Or like...
It was pretty close to it. I think it was in December at some point. But yeah, it was a good 3 days. Because we didn't have anything else to worry about. But people who were commuting, it was a nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
And on the highways, people got stuck. Cars got covered in snow. Transport trucks got covered in snow. Accidents happened.
And one point you brought up is, are we prepared for it? How can you prepare for something like that?
The only thing I can really think of is you can use this as a model and try to understand from a meteorological standpoint how this storm formed and signs to look out for it. So I know our technology has increased vastly since 1977 and greatly. And I think that would be our best predictor. But it is interesting to note, though, for this case, is that people were just tired of the snow at this point. And they thought, like they were warned about, something might be coming. They just figured, it's just the same thing we've been getting this entire time, like whatever. So a lot of people were really caught off guard by this, which is also very dangerous.
One thing I was just thinking of, I think it was Pat that said it earlier on, is like the sense of community that it brings. The Buffalo Bills, the NFL team, when they have bad storms, they let the people come in and shovel, and like they pay them minimum wage. They let them eat and have drinks and stuff.
Well, you mean they shoveled the stadium?
They shovel the stadium. It's really cool. They put almost like a slide in where the stairs are, and then they shovel it out. It goes down the slide, and then it goes down to like these machines, and then it gets carried out.
I feel like Buffalo always gets dumped on with snow. That's just
it's happened. No, it happened once this year. So again, like you said, this technology that knows that the storm's coming 50 years later now, they know to bring people in like the morning of, and then they have a game like 8 hours later.
Speaking of technology, Buffalo needs to build some roofs.
Buffalo's used to it. Like their stadium right now, it's zero covered, and actually they're coming out with a new stadium that's only 60% covered, because that's just the atmosphere that they have there. It's like the Bills Mafia there. That's what they call their fans.
okay.
And
So it's more of just like a community thing. Like it's like, this is who we are, like an identity piece.
they embrace
They
it.
embrace the snow.
Just stubbornness.
Like the big game that they had was the San Francisco 49ers coming from California. They got their butts whooped because they couldn't play in the snow.
Ooh.
Like Buffalo embraces it.
So it's strategy. I like
Almost, yeah. Some teams can play in the
like-
cold, and
Sounds like Russia in World War II.
All right, Pat, your turn. What'd you think of the case? Since you chose this topic, did you know much about it before?
Well, I knew there was snow, and I knew people died and there was hardships, but just the extent of it, like, that's crazy. Like covering cars completely, going over top of telephone poles and stuff.
There were actually instances too, I didn't mention this earlier, but school buses were entirely covered by snow as well, and they had to be dug out. But like just the fact that the snow drifts were that high and they were compacted like cement is just unfathomable. We've never ever experienced anything like that.
All right, so fast forward once everybody's back to safety, the roads are cleared. How much fun would that be if you're a kid just building snow forts and stuff for the next 4 months until summer comes?
I mean, I think at that point, the kids were so traumatized from being stuck in the schools that they were just wishing that the cold weather and snow would leave. It really depends. I feel like it's circumstantial. I can't speak, obviously, for the vast majority of people. I wasn't there. None of us were. But I would think in my mind that if you're a kid stuck in a school for 2 days and you haven't seen your parents and you're not used to not being away from them for that long, that's traumatizing.
Yeah, that's true. That's why all these kids are now retirees living in Florida.
you brought that up, like them being stuck in the school. I'm just imagining myself being there, and this was like before you could FaceTime your family. It was complete radio silence. Like, I work at a school where there's 4-year-olds all the way up to 13-year-olds. How on earth do you comfort a 4, 5, 6-year-old, like saying, "Oh, it's all going to be okay," and you have no idea. Like, and having to do that for 48 hours. I don't know. I didn't want to put a damper on the episode. It was sort of a sad episode. It's because you were saying about what 29 people lost their lives to this.
I do want to give a lot of credit here for Erno Rossi, who was the author of the book called The White Death. So he did largely all the research for this case, because when I was doing my research for this, it was really difficult to find information on this besides his book. His book is kind of considered the pinnacle and the core of all the information that's out there. So he went around to all these towns and interviewed people. And I guess he was saying in an interview that they all kind of just flocked to him and they were ready to talk about it, which isn't normal. It wasn't what he was expecting, because normally people are quite tight-lipped about that kind of thing, but they were just ready to tell the story. And he said he couldn't get them to stop talking sometimes. They just kept having story after story after story. So he included that in the book. So I tried looking for this book, and it is incredibly hard to find. It's on eBay. I saw it on Amazon for $112. And the cheapest I saw it was $76. However, there is a website for Erno Rossi called The White Death, and you can apparently order from there, and they send over a DVD with a slideshow on it as well. So for those of you who are interested in purchasing that book, visit that website. He unfortunately has passed away, but I'm sure the funds go towards his family and supporting them and in his memory, because he did a lot of work for this.
He wasn't a local, was he? Like,
from what I could find about him, it says he was from Port Colborne. So I would assume at that point that he was there during the storm and experienced it himself. All right, so that's going to end the episode for tonight. If you have any ideas for the show or want your story featured, please email us at strangeandundecided@gmail.com. As always, thanks for listening.
And
Good night.